The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Frosty Walker with Chief Information Security Officer at Texas Education Agency, and welcome to our third in a series of webinars regarding cybersecurity for the fall semester 2018. Today, we'll be covering website hardening and website vulnerability programs that can help you and your web team keep your websites running without potentially suffering from any application or OS vulnerabilities being exploited. We hope you will find this information informative. We will allow time at the end of the presentation for questions and answers. Should you have a question during the presentation, feel free to submit them and we'll get them queued for the question and answer session at the end of the presentation. I want to say a little bit about our Data Security Advisory Committee that provides guidance to the Texas education communities, maximizing collaboration and communication regarding information security issues and resources, which can be utilized within the education communities. The DSAC is currently comprised of representatives from school districts, ESCs, TEA, and the private sector. The DSAC is diverse both in size and geographically, and willing to share needs and ideas and time to hopefully provide solutions for everyday cybersecurity issues encountered in the educational communities. Thank you for those that are on the call today that work with that committee. I appreciate your help very much. A recording of the webinars are posted on our cybersecurity tips and tools, and that can be found at the Texas Gateway. That URL is https://www.texasgateway.org under cybersecurity tips and tools. If you browse to that URL, you will see featured resources, and cybersecurity data, cybersecurity tips and tools is one of those featured resources. And there we have all the presentations that have been presented so far, in addition to additional resources, including sites for free training, risk assessments, a lot of different tools that can be utilized within the educational community. So I want to make sure that everyone understands that we have a lot of different resources that have been posted there for their use. So today we're going to talk about how two steps. We're going to plan a secure application, and we're going to talk about maintaining existing websites as well. So we'll first talk about planning a secure application. And when we talk about planning a secure application, one of the first things we want to do is we want to come up with some type of a process flow chart. And so I have an example of a process flow chart that identifies some processes. And if you look at this, you'll quickly recognize that this is an alarm clock ringing for us to get up in the morning. So we have a start, the alarm rings. Are we ready to get up? If the answer is no, we hit the snooze button. It relays back to the alarm. It's set to go off in 5 minutes. And we go through that process again. And that typical process averages 3 times before we eventually say, yes, we need to get out of bed. We climb out of bed, and then the process is ended. So this is an example of a simple process chart. So if we're going to develop an application, we want to have some type of process chart that would identify the basic processes that are going on in that application. In addition to a process flow chart, we also want to have an application diagram. And this is a sample of a simple application diagram. And we'll see that we have a computer and a browser and an end user out there, and they are going to browse to our website via HTTPS and HTTP Secure Transport Security Protocol. and that is actually a federal mandate for anyone that has federal funding to be sure and use that particular, the HTTP Secure Transport Security. That is a special configuration on the SSL. It also mandates that we use TLS 1.2 or higher for that connection. So that's how our users in most cases would connect up to our web servers. Then our web servers are going to talk via HTTPS inside our network to our application servers. And those application servers are going to talk SQL or again through HTTPS to potentially a database or relational database, the backbone where most of the data is actually kept. There is more information about the HTTP Secure Transport Security. There's a cheat sheet that's provided out at the OWASP.org at that URL that you'll find that below. But this is a simple application diagram. If we want that application to be a little more secure, we would now add a firewall in between the end user and our application servers and our web servers, our application servers, and our databases. And that that firewall would actually allow us to say what type of traffic is going to come in from that browser. So we're only going to allow port 443. We're only going to allow HTTPS via HSTS. And so a lot of traffic that normally be generated over the internet would then be dropped by the firewall and would not get to our web servers or our application servers or our database servers. So this is one level of a diagram where we've added additional security. We could also add another layer of security in this application diagram should we decide to deploy a application firewall. And those now, they used to just be an appliance, but you can actually route your website through a cloud service that does application firewall services. And that actually, even within the HTTPS, if someone sends a command that is determined to be malicious, let's say a SQL injection, it will say, well, we don't need a SQL injection. We're not allowing SQL injection, and it would drop that SQL injection. So a SQL injection would never hit your web server or your application servers. So that is an additional layer that we could put in at that point between the end users and our network is a application firewall. In addition to that, we could add more security, and we could actually use firewalls to segment our web servers, our application servers, and our database servers. And by doing that, we would then only allow certain web servers to talk to certain application servers, and certain application servers could only talk to specific database servers. So this would harden the inside of your network. Whereas if we just had one firewall out there, we have a hardening on the outside, but the inside is soft and gooey, much like an egg. So this is a simple application diagram with segmented network. You say, well, there would be a cost associated with that. And yes, there would be, but we are talking about additional security. And that is one of the things that we want to make sure that we protect when we are trying to protect the information that the citizens of Texas have shared with us. So that's some examples of application diagram, very simplistic, not too complicated, that you would want to make sure that you had if you were developing, or even if you were requesting someone to develop and host that. You would want both the flow chart, the process flow chart, and an application diagram of how that application is going to work and where they have security implemented in those diagrams. So we're going to talk a little bit about a vulnerability scanning program. And when we talk about vulnerability scanning programs, we are indeed talking about using specific tools, vulnerability scanners. And we're going to talk first about if this is in-house, then we'll talk about if you want to outsource that, and we'll talk about some of the contractual obligations that you would need to do that with. But let's talk about a vulnerability scanning program in general. And anytime you are starting to do a development in-house, you want to be prepared to start your vulnerability scanning. Vulnerability scanning should take place as your developers are completing sprints or modules. The reason for that is when it is most economical and efficient time to correct security issues and vulnerabilities during that early phase of the development. It's more costly to work on those once you put all those modules together and they're actually one big program. So you want to do that as quickly as you can to avoid additional time and cost in remediating issues. By the time that application is ready to move into test, it should be clean of most vulnerabilities. And you should have documented artifacts on the vulnerabilities that still exist, and you want potential remediation steps to resolve those issues during a test release. So you can say, well, yes, we found some SQL injection, but we're going to fix it in release 2 in test. Okay, so you have an artifact, you've identified that issue, and you've identified when you're going to have that resolved. And so that would be acceptable. Each release version in your test environment should be scanned, and remediation efforts should be scheduled. So you want, every time you come up with a new release in your test environment, you want to be scanning and scheduling remediation to resolve those issues. Prior to it going and being promoted into production, all vulnerabilities, and I put in parentheses here, not warnings, should be remediated. Most of your application scanners has a rating. They have a high, a medium, a low, and warnings. And warnings are typically there to let you know that there's potentially issues with the way your code is written, but it doesn't mean that it can necessarily be exploited. But you do want to look at those warnings just to make sure that there's nothing that you know, when you promote that into production, you're in many cases you're going to be running that on maybe different hardware than in your test environment. You could be running with different configurations. You could be running with all types of different memory. So when you move that into production, the first thing you want to do is to scan that to make sure that it's clean in production as well. Sometimes we see that happen when you move something from test to production. Just because of a configuration change or something in the operating system, you may see flags or vulnerabilities identified. And oftentimes when you're using these tools, you will find that you have what they call false positives. So you need to be able to have a good program that you can work with and potentially identify false readings. Once you get it into production, your job is not through. You actually want to start a routine on a regular basis of scanning any releases. And that would mean that if a new release is released into production, you want to scan that as quickly as possible. And if, you know, on a regular basis, I would recommend trying to scan that on a quarter or every 6-month period. And you look through your vulnerabilities and you want to start planning a remediation effort on how to resolve those issues. So as you have new releases that are being developed in dev and test for for that same application, you want to be scanning those as well. So you can see that an application vulnerability scanning program can be quite intensive in the amount of work that requires for some of your team. So who needs an application vulnerability scanning program? Well, number one, if you develop applications in-house, you need a vulnerability scanning program. You need the ability to scan for applications, and we're going to talk about that tool here and some of the things that you need to look for in an application vulnerability scanning tool. Number one, it should identify vulnerabilities and security issues. Number two, it should identify where those security and vulnerability issues are located within the code. Just identifying that you have 12 SQL injection issues in the code is not a lot of help. So it needs to tell you specifically within your code where those issues are. It also should be able to give you an estimate of the time that it's going to take to remediate the issue. And it should have references on how to resolve those issues. Now, you say, well, you want to be able to talk to your development team and say, it's going to take you X amount of time to resolve these issues. And here are references on how to fix it. And most of the better application vulnerability scanning programs today, those tools have all of those incorporated. I know a while back I was in a situation where we found a legacy application that it was going to take an estimated 10 man-years to resolve all of the issues. So we went to our development team and said, look, guys, this is really a massive undertaking. And they said, well, we're really scheduled to decommission that application in a year, and we're building a new application to replace it. And I said, well, is it possible that we could implement the new application to replace that legacy application sooner than in a year? And they're saying, well, it's pretty tight. We actually were able to bring on some additional resources to work with that application, and we were able to retire or decommission that application that was going to take 10 man-years to resolve the issues in, and bring up a new application that at the time we brought it up had no vulnerabilities identified. So you have to work with your development team in resolving those issues. And the more information you can give them to help resolve those issues, the better they can do their jobs. So that is the four major things that I feel that a vulnerability scanning tool should have. So you say, well, what should I include in my vulnerability scanning program? Well, first of all, you want to look at all your publicly facing applications. And at a minimum, you should routinely scan them for vulnerabilities and develop remediation steps and plans, a roadmap, to resolve those issues in a timely manner. You know, everybody is a little different. Again, it depends on the rating of those vulnerabilities. Like I said, there are high, medium, and low typically identified. You want to prioritize those high and medium vulnerabilities, and you want to be able to, you may want to take longer to resolve some of the lower rated vulnerabilities. But you want to schedule a roadmap to resolve all of those issues when you're working with that. So those are the ones that are already in production, and you're trying to resolve any issues that you find in those, as well as those that you're just now developing in-house. Many of you may say, well, it's difficult. I don't know if I want to bring on those types of resources and put that much effort into this. Well, I'll go back to the quote that I often use from John Keel, former Texas State Auditor. He said, "You can outsource everything except responsibility." And that is very true with cybersecurity. You can actually outsource a company. There are companies out there that will run vulnerability scans on all of your publicly facing IP addresses and send you those reports. If you've developed those applications in-house, then you can then turn those reports over to your development team for them to resolve those issues, as well as any of those websites you may have with partners that host them outside your data center. So there are ways that you can get around and still provide that functionality and make sure that your applications are secure and less likely to be exploited by known vulnerabilities by possibly looking at the feasibility of using a third party as an outsource. You say, well, I can take a look at that for all the applications that I've got now, but what do I do about the applications that I want to outsource moving forward? So we actually have some sample contract language. You will see the NYE used frequently, and that is the name of your entity. And so this is some contract language if you are going to do your vulnerability scanning program in-house. So you're going to do this yourself, but you're dealing with vendors that are developing and going to host those applications somewhere, let's just say in the cloud. So you want to develop some early expectations in your contract language, and you want to state, expect all partners, consultants, and vendors to abide by your entity's information security policies. Whether it's being hosted in the cloud or whether it's being hosted in your own data center, you should be able to contractually get vendors to agree to meet your security policies. You're going to talk a little bit about they're going to need to take appropriate administrative, technical, and physical security needs to incorporate all the relevant stages of data storage, processing, transmission, and destruction. We don't talk a lot about destruction of data, but a lot of times contracts terminate. You want to make sure that data is destructed, so we have to talk about that. This is to accomplish the overall information security objective in mitigating risks both directly and indirectly by any of your entities managed or their business partners' information resources. So you're very clear up front with your vendors what you're expecting them to do. Abide by your security policies and your security objective of mitigating risk. Either whether it's they manage it or you manage it, you expect that to be managed the same way. I'm going to talk just a little bit about if they're running it on maybe potentially unauthorized or your entity computers, that might be subject to public information request. You have to be very clear that you certainly want them to understand that because your agency is indeed subject to public information requests, they may be subject to information request as well. Websites, portals shall be accessible through secure connection, HTTPS only with HTTP Secure Transport Security, that's HSTS, utilizing Transportation Layer Security, TLS, version 1.2 or higher. You want to be very specific as to how your customers will be secure when they're connecting to that website. You want to retain the right to scan the websites for vulnerabilities and request remediation of identified issues in a timely manner, not to exceed 3 months. Now, I picked 90 days. You might could extend that a little further, but I think somewhere between 90 days and 120 days is an adequate time for someone to resolve issues. Now, this is key, again, that you are retaining the right to scan the vulnerabilities. Okay? The vendor agrees to provide secure configuration guidelines that are fully describe all the security relevant configuration options and implications to the overall security of the software. So you want to see that configurations, you want to see that application diagram, what all is being put in place for someone that's going to host your application. There's some additional things, so they're going to provide you with a supporting platform, including operating system, web server, application servers, and how they are configured for security. Even if that is going to be in the cloud, you want to know how they're going to provide security on that application and the hardware that they're going to host it on. There's some following examples relating to best application and development practices. Usage limiting techniques and other protective countermeasures to prevent such things as a denial of service or automated attack vulnerability. You want that built into the architecture if you can get that approved in your language. You also want significantly strong encryption per industry standards, where any confidential information is at rest or traverses across the network. And you want them to do effective error handling that does not return unnecessary verbose messages to the user that could be used to gain insight to the application internals or other privileged processes or data. So those are some of the things that you want to look at when we're talking about dealing with someone that is hosting and are developing an application for your use. You also want to make sure that the vendor will notify your entity within committed time frames and your information security officer of a security or a privacy incident, including but not limited to actual or suspected data breaches or denial of service attack that will affect infrastructure operations within the service agreement. So you want to be notified within 24 hours if there is suspect a breach or of a denial of service that has been launched upon your attack that is not allowing your customers to be able to access the application. And in 24 hours, that's really pretty long time. You might even want to see if you can get that reduced down closer to 12 or less. But at least in a denial of service, where your users cannot access the application that you intended for them to, they should be required to notify you. And they're going to have a report on any security vulnerabilities that affects your platforms directly or indirectly that are published by the sources. So we're often familiar with OS vulnerabilities that are announced and that need to be remediated, such as Microsoft. Microsoft has Patch Tuesday. But if a vendor receives information from one of their sources, one of an OS or one of the language that the application is being written in, you also want them to notify you that they have received that. We don't have to wait until we run the next vulnerability scan to find that out. We want them to notify us, and we want them to provide a mitigation or a repair advice within 72 hours or how they're going to resolve this issue. And if there's a patch available from the source provider, the vendor that is writing the language, it may be an Oracle, it could be Microsoft. There's a lot of different languages that are used out there, and middleware software as well. You want them to provide you with a roadmap that says here's when we're going to fix this and here's how we're going to do it. And you want that done again within a certain time frame, such as 3 months. So you can see that you want to get pretty detailed in that contract language, that even though they're building the application, they're hosting the application, you have retained the right to do vulnerability scans. You're going to send them a report when you find a vulnerability, and they are going to resolve that. Or if there's an issue that a vulnerability is identified by a source or a vendor, and it's publicly announced, then the vendor should notify you, hey, we've received this notification from Oracle, for example, and we're going to apply that patch in the next 30 days, or we're going to apply that patch this week. Whatever that time frame is, they should notify you in that case. And you say, well, again, I don't have the resources to do a vulnerability scanning program. You say, well, as you renegotiate or renew contracts with services for services and develop new applications, you should include the same type of contract information that we have talked about here. We're going to go through the same basic steps, put what you're expecting them and any of their partners to abide by your information security policies. You may have to furnish them a copy of your information security policies. That's not a problem, but you want them to provide the same type of protection to that data and the applications as if you were hosting it in-house. We want them to go through the same appropriate administrative and technical physical security controls, relevant stages of data storage, processing, transmission, and destruction to overall accomplish information security objective of mitigating risk, whether you do that directly or indirectly, whether they're managing it or someone else. And again, they could actually be partnering with someone else that's providing some of those services. So you include that language in the contract as well. And the same thing is true, again, we talked about subject to Public Information Act request. We want them to make sure that they're in compliance with the Department of Homeland Security's requirements for all of our websites to be hosted using HTTPS with HTTP Secure Transport Security and utilizing Transport Layer Security version 1.2 or higher. You want to specifically spell that out in the contract. Make sure that they're not supporting any weak ciphers. Now, you are still going to retain the right to scan websites for vulnerabilities and request remediation. And you say, well, why would I want to retain that? I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to ask them to do that a little further in the contract. But you still want to retain that right. You may eventually find out, or you may be able to have additional resources that you could add that program. And so it doesn't hurt for you to retain the right to be able to do that. You're just retaining the right to do that. So as we move further into the contract, we're still going to ask them to provide configuration guidelines that fully describe how they configure everything, give us diagrams of how things operate in the operating system and what security, like firewalls, they have in place. You want all of that information. And just like before, we're going to talk to them about usage limiting techniques and strong encryption and error handling, but now we've added a fourth bullet here under D. It says vendor agrees to run quarterly vulnerability scans on any of your entity's applications in productions and will share that report with your entity along with a roadmap for completion of remediation of all the vulnerabilities that are identified and within a certain time frame. In this case, we specified 90 days. So you can include that in your contract. and the vendors will provide that for you. Now, yes, they may include additional costs with that, but you're able to get that done. So you want to specify that you want to specify they're going to share that report with you. I would recommend that they share that they not only share that report, but they share that report with your entity's information security officer, and that along with that report, they're also going to share develop and share a roadmap of how they're going to remediate those issues within a timely manner. So you can include that information and request that they perform that function as well. And again, then we talk about, in that same contract language, we're still going to talk about security of private incidents, potential breaches or denial of a service attack, the same language we used before. Notify you, the entity, within 24 hours, and they're also going to report any new vulnerabilities that are identified from source of such as Microsoft with patches, or Oracle, or any of those middleware type of software that's used in application development. There's also a third option where you could indeed contract with a third party to scan all of your IP addresses, and they'll send you a report. You would then have to get with those folks in-house. If you have some in-house, you would send that report to all of your partners that are hosting your websites. So there are multiple ways that you can implement a vulnerability program and help secure your applications. So at this time, I'm going to turn it. We're going to look and see if we've had any questions. And if we've not, I have one other subject that we're going to talk briefly about. But I appreciate everybody's attention today. Thank you all very much. And let me see if I can find questions and answers here. So one of the questions that we have here is, do you have an application scanning tool you recommend? There are several good products out there. IBM has something called application security application security on cloud. So it is not you don't run it in-house. It runs in the cloud. HP has a very good application tool as well. There's different versions of Nessus. So there is a open source version of Nessus that isn't updated quite as frequently as the version that you pay for, but Nessus is certainly a very popular tool that's used out there. So I'm trying to think of others. I actually use Nexpose. We actually use a third-party vendor to scan all of our publicly facing webs through a tool called Nexpose, and Nexpose is a very, very good tool as well. So there is a large variety of tools out there that you can take a look at in that sector. And if anybody is looking at that, I can potentially pull up Magic Quadrant for those tools through Gartner, and we can we can tell you what's in the Magic Quadrant. There's another tool out there that's called Coalfire One. So there's a lot of different vulnerability scanning tools out there that's available. Any other questions today? Well, we'll check the questions again here in a moment. The other topic that I wanted to talk about today, besides questions, was a reminder that 'tis the season to be jolly, and with that we see a huge increase in phishing and spear phishing attacks. If you haven't noticed that, then consider yourself very lucky, or I need to know some of those web filters that you're using, because we use multiple filters to filter for spam, and we still get lots through our to our end users. But we are seeing very specific spear phishing attacks, and where we're seeing an increase in fake invoices containing malware or demanding immediate payment over past due invoices. We've had 2 schools that have reported falling victim to scams, and they sent payments for past due invoices overseas for pretty large sums. So those are being worked on through legal and law enforcement. They're using law enforcement to work with that. But I just want to remind everyone, be sure and provide your users with security awareness training to cover these types of threats. We're actually meeting with our procurement and accounts payable teams to do a quick 15-minute rebriefing and re-education because of the number of spear phishing attacks we're seeing containing fake invoices or potentially malware. So being very, very, very targeted in their efforts. So I applaud the malware folks for being so ambitious and trying to make some money during the season to buy their kids Christmas presents as well. But we certainly want to make sure that our end users are doing their due diligence in preventing those for the ones that slip through our filters. Well, I've had no other questions. So with that, we'll actually give back everybody about 15 minutes of time today. I appreciate your attendance, and thank y'all very much. We'll start our next webinar series hopefully in January. Thank y'all very much. Have a good day.